Good evening and welcome to this Facebook Live session. My name is John Campion and I'm the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner. I'm joined by three colleagues, and I'll let them introduce themselves and then I will explain how we're going to run tonight's session. So Tracy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, good evening. My name's Tracy Onslow and I'm the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner working for John.
Anthony?
Very good evening, Anthony Bangham, Chief Constable, West Mercia Police.
And Julian.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Julian Moss. I'm the Deputy Chief Constable.
Thank you all, and thank you to those that are watching live and those that watch back this recording. I welcome you live to my kitchen as we're in quite extraordinary times, as we've seen 2020 change what we describe as the new normal. So even pandemics don't stop the bureaucratic work of setting the very important things like police budgets and my budget as West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner. Tonight's session is around explaining some of the proposals that are within that budget that fund not only West Mercia Police, but also some of the victim services that and crime prevention services that I fund directly. We have been advertising this session sometime in advance, and we have some questions from the public. But if there are questions from those that are watching live, if you comment on them beneath this broadcast, we will endeavour to answer them. We intend to go for about 45 minutes roughly. We intend to take a fairly conversational style, talking about the different parts of my police and crime plan that are being progressed as part of this budget. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about my policing budget and what I was intending to do with your money. So I pride myself usually in getting out and about across the whole of West Mercia, talking to communities to make sure we understand their views and indeed their priorities are at the centre of policing. The pandemic has stopped lots of face-to-face contact during 2020. So we have looked to use other channels. And one of those was a very large consultation that we did back in November last year, to which we called Your Voice. And we had a significant number of local residents reply, and it was on a whole raft of issues that they're concerned about in relation to community safety, but also their priorities for the police. At the centre, I think, of a lot of what we heard from that survey was around the value they place on their policing service being visible in their community that they live in or work in. So visibility of your local police service is at the heart of my budget proposals this year, and they feature in a large number of the proposals that we're going to talk about. Also, they said clearly that they wanted their local priorities also to be given a greater profile within the work of West Mercia Police. Of course, our police service have to work around all kinds of different threats to us as individuals, some of them visible, some of them not visible, some of them very serious, some of them more low level. But the public have said clearly that they want their priorities to be or to have a greater profile within how their police service is working with them in the community. And the last part that we heard from the public was around reform, making sure things like the IT is fit for purpose so that the community can engage with us and we can engage with the community appropriately. And as part of that, preventing crime, whether it be online crime or indeed using technology to help thwart things like burglary, was also a key part of what they said to us. You'll see in the budget proposals that are on my website, you'll see there will be a further 91 officers delivered as part of this budget. That would see an additional 400 police officers recruited over what we had when I was elected in May 2016. You'll see that we are focusing on ensuring that those resources continue to be aligned to the public's priorities, but also the priorities causing the most harm. Two of those that I would pick out are the deaths and serious injuries caused on our roads, but the second would be the injury and, of course, deaths that are caused by domestic violence and domestic abuse. So you will also see some of the resources targeted towards those issues. You'll also see that I am asking the public to pay more. I've been proud over my term as Commissioner to have amongst the lowest council tax precepts during my term, but it's right that this year, as we seek to not only afford the additional officers, but also maximise their worth and indeed impact to keeping us safe in West Mercia, we need to ensure that we have the resources to do that. So this year, I am asking the public, the average Band D equivalent, to pay on average £1.25 per month extra. That's £15 a year extra for the average Band D household. And I don't do that lightly. I do that because I believe there is a compelling case for our public. I'm not a high tax politician, as I've shown during my first 4 years of term, but it's right that this year, with all the uncertainty the pandemic has brought, and indeed the benefit of the additional officers, that it's right that we invest now to ensure that we are kept safe in these uncertain times, and that we can continue to deliver on those priorities of the public. So I'm sure some of that will come out as we go through this session, and I'm going to start on an area that I think is one of the hardest parts of my police and crime plan to deliver. It's an area called Reassured West Mercia. Anthony, I want to start the conversation, if I can, to steer you towards one of the commitments within the budget paper, which is about the pledge to deliver a community policing charter, a charter that would set out some of the expectations, the standards the public can hold West Mercia to police to around their policing in their local area. I just wondered if you wanted to kick off really as to why you think this is important and the so what, as it were, would be for the public.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, John. One of the biggest challenges we face in West Mercia is having consistent standards and an approach that you can write down and guarantee for all neighbourhoods, all people who live in the various different parts of West Mercia. So what we've done is had a look at how things have changed, and as we grow as an organisation, which we have over the last couple of years and will continue into the next year, we feel now it's the right time to draw upon all the good practice from across the force, where we are doing lots of things, but we don't always do it consistently. So what we often hear is, well, that happens in that area, but we don't get it in our area. And the whole idea of a charter, of writing this down, is to share with the public what we think, and of course we will, in developing it, we will ask them for their opinion. It'll be done through consultation, but it'll be to lay down very clearly how we will provide our local services and precisely the level of response, the level of accessibility, the level of visibility, how you will access local officers, how you would get more specialist support. So it's really our attempt to put it down in one place that can be shared right across West Mercia and will in a sense guarantee, and can be challenged if we fail, will guarantee the level of service that everybody can expect. So it's just putting down some of which we do already, but also enhancing as we continue to grow as an organisation.
Anthony, I know you've been a West Mercian for a very long time, and indeed you've seen the ebbs and flows in police numbers, and indeed I was on the old police authority when we rose up to 2,400 back in the noughties, and then we disappeared down below the 2,000. We're surging now back up to that, on the way to that 2,400. It's been described to me as a civilian, as the numbers went down, policing sometimes retrenches back to the central core role. As the numbers go back up, the more qualitative local policing, not necessarily the softer side, but the more community-based of policing, is it your aspiration that as part of that charter, that benefit will be felt in local communities, which are often very low crime, even no crime?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, as an emergency service, you're quite right. As we become less in our numbers, we can do less of what we would term the proactive policing, some of the preventative policing, some of the high visible patrol that might not give you absolute tangible outputs straight away, but we do know that over many, many years, your presence and your relationship with the public will, of course, keep those parishes safe and crime-free, if indeed that is their starting point. But as we have, you described retrenched a little bit, I wouldn't argue against that. You know, if we are several hundred officers less, then we have to get back to our core business of emergency response policing. What this charter will do is describe how, once again, we will get much more into the proactive, the preventative, the high visible policing, and it will be through negotiation to meet the local priorities and commitments from parish councils, as an example, from local people. What is it that is important to them, to you, so that we can respond through that more proactive approach?
One of the things when we're able to travel around the place, we've got lots of police bases across West Mercia, haven't we? In terms of they're often sometimes a very small base in our community. Some have slightly larger ones. Very few of them have traditional front. I was going to say manned, but there's another word that I probably should use in 2021. Staffed. Front counter, which is perhaps a traditional view of police stations. Some of my communities say to me, our local police station is closed. I had it put to me recently that Market Drayton, that the police station was closed. Well, I know it's operational 24 hours a day. There are police teams based from there, but the public don't necessarily see them as accessible. Do you see the policing charter changing some of that in terms of how the public interact with their local police service, appropriately, of course, but to make them as accessible as you would hope they would be?
Shall I pick that up, Anthony?
Yeah, I'll bring you in a minute, Julian. I think, John, the answer is yes, to a degree, because there will be some places where the reason why that perception exists is because we've not done our bit to make it known and perhaps make ourselves accessible in a building. Police stations are buildings, but they are highly symbolic. And if we've not opened it up or made the officers accessible who work from there, then of course the public can be forgiven for thinking it's closed and perhaps we are not there. So in those areas we do need to improve. But I'll go back to where I started. This is about getting the consistent standards, really capturing the best practice that is already out there. We've got many, many rural stations and outstations where it is absolutely not what you've described. The public do know how to access our officers. There are some people, and some of them are staffed and some of them are not staffed, and where they are staffed, they do a great job. But what we do have to look at is how to modernise that to a better service where people can access modern policing, and that doesn't always mean walking into a front desk and having a person-to-person conversation. There are many different ways. So, Julian, do you want to pick up a little bit on that?
Yeah, very much. I agree with Anthony. The policing, local policing charter will set out expectations for residents right across West Mercia for what they can expect to see in terms of visibility and accessibility of our service, and that includes accessing their local officers at local stations, but also, crucially, being able to reach us on the phone when they need us. Yes, the charter will cover all those bases. It's going to be based on a number of themes. Visibility and accessibility, you've mentioned, John, is a really important one. What will local neighbourhood teams do to support the vulnerable? How are we going to work with local communities and parishes on problem solving? There'll be a good number of themes that the charter will cover.
The other thing I was just going to touch on around visibility, lockdown has changed, as I've said a couple of times, the way we work, and I, especially during the lockdown last year, was probably more visible in where I live at times I wouldn't normally be. I'd have a day around the kitchen table as I am now, so maybe take some time at lunchtime or early evening to walk in my local area, and I was often shocked about how there are local police in the area that I live. And I don't think it's a tactic, Anthony, that you deploy to deploy them around where I live. But the visibility of police officers only lasts for the moment that they're there. There's no lasting mark that they've been there, is there? And I suppose I'm interested in the charter and how it's described to me that the being more effectively visible, whether that be in communities, you know, the pinch points outside schools, or more visible online, that emphasis on trying to be more visible and to be the equivalent of the milk bottle on the doorstep after the milkman has been.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And last year, and obviously continuing into this year, there are people, they have changed their routines, and therefore when you change your routine, you see things that are perhaps there all the time, but you just didn't realise. And policing is always a challenge as to how we leave that trace, how we make sure that people know that we have been there, because as you say, we don't put posts through the door, or we don't leave milk on the doorstep. But there are more things we can do. We can be more intelligent and sophisticated in our approach to ensure that we are able to use social media, for example, to tell people where we've been, where we are going, actually share some of that information more online platforms, doing things like the one we're doing today, really, where you can communicate with a wider group of the public who perhaps can opt in or opt out depending on what they need. But we are hoping the charter will lay out more clearly what you should expect to see and what you can then challenge us on if perhaps you feel you're not getting it.
I'd add to that, sorry, John, I'd add to that that this is an opportunity to announce that we do plan to make better use of technology that's available. That means social media platforms. It also means the new community messaging system that we're about to roll out, which you know, we've got a fantastic network of people within communities that are interested in policing. They're part of Neighbourhood Watch programs. That they are very supportive of keeping their communities safe. And very soon they will have a new messaging system that brings us into the 21st century and doesn't rely on voicemail. So that's coming very soon.
We're on a platform, video platform tonight, and lots of parish councils and community groups have been meeting like this throughout the pandemic. Is it your expectation, in the same way that actually travelling 20 miles sometimes to go to a meeting isn't possible, but there are lots of other methods now of joining community meetings and community groups where appropriate, that your officers and staff would, in that community policing charter, look to engage through perhaps the traditional channels? It's not just about turning up. You can turn up virtually these days.
Yeah, definitely. And last year has taught us how you can do things differently. I think everybody has grown in confidence and seen opportunities from how we've been forced to work differently. And the expectation often is just too much for our officers. They can't get to every parish council meeting. They can't get to every community meeting. However, with social media, it does allow us, you can create videos and you can share presentations, you can share information, or indeed you can just dial in to a part of a meeting, you can do a 15-minute input, and then of course you can continue. And if they haven't got to travel to all of those meetings, which traditionally has been the expectation and probably the only way of achieving that, then you can do a lot more of them. And absolutely, we would hope that this will give that time back that is so important.
Thanks, Anthony. Just before we move on from Reassure, one of the things I know is something we've talked about a lot over our time together, working together, when we talk about contact and that ease of contact around the 101 through our operational control centre, and indeed the performance of that, as it were. And I'm very much past we shouldn't just be measuring how quick we answer the phones, but also the quality of that call. And you've touched a little bit around other channels. In the budget, we're investing more in technology, and I didn't know whether yourself or Julian just wanted to talk a little bit around what the role of 101 is likely to be in some of the other channels you've touched on as you talking about making sure people get the right information or the right answer first time, rather than necessarily having to make multiple contacts, etc., etc. I'm just interested in what this budget will do for that.
Well, I'll come in there, Anthony, if you like. A lot of work is being done about understanding the ways in which the public can and want to engage with us. So 101 is a well-known mechanism, but many people now can get a better, quicker service that is more suited to them by going online. And particularly when during this COVID crisis, we've been really stretched. The public have responded in a really understanding way and been able to receive the service that they need online, whether that's been reporting COVID breaches, and that's worked well, I think, for the public in those circumstances, and well for us as well. But of course, you'll always need 101, and we are absolutely committed to being able to pick up that phone in a reasonable time. Well, of course, we'll always prioritise those urgent 999 calls. But this year, we're looking to engage in a different way with communities. We'd like to use Facebook Live with safer neighbourhood teams, but also some of our specialists. You know, we'd love to have a conversation with people who've been affected by some really tricky issues, domestic abuse, sexual assault, so we can get a better understanding out there of how people are affected by these great crimes and how society as a whole can help. So there's a huge world out there that we're ready to explore and to expand.
One of the things that I think is not understood out there in the community, the report it online is triaged in the same way as the 101 non-emergency calls. So you actually might get a faster response via the online reporting than you would via the 101. But I think my public is also saying clearly that the 101 channel, whilst traditional, is still important to them. And I think the journey that we'll take on this budget around embedding some of the other channels and indeed bringing that the value from those other channels out to communities and that improvement in service will be really important. I want to move on if I can, unless there was something Tracy was going to ask.
There was, John. Just to say that we've actually had a question in, and it was around SNT teams, and it was from John in Ludlow. And I'm just trying to read this off my phone, but it says, if we do have a safer neighbourhood team in Ludlow, where are they active, and why do I never see any foot patrols? Which is a question we've been asked a lot before on Ludlow streets. And then there's a comment about what has happened to the previous person, the special constable who was on foot patrol last year in lockdown. I didn't like to say his name because he was a reassuring sight. So there's a little bit of a contradiction there, because clearly they did see the PSO last year with the street patrols. But so we just wanted some reassurance around the fact that there is an SNT team who are regularly patrolling in Ludlow, if you wouldn't mind, Julian or Anthony.
Yeah, I'll come in. I was actually in Ludlow on patrol myself just before Christmas when we were doing one of the evenings on the way up to Christmas, and I can absolutely confirm that they have both local SNT, the Safer Neighbourhood Team officers, and also there are some response officers who work on a shift rotation from Ludlow Police Station, and they work in that South Shropshire area with colleagues from North Herefordshire in particular, because of the rural nature and the crossover. I think really for me, I would just respond by confirming what we just said earlier. What we have to accept, that we are probably not making ourselves as accessible as we should do. It's disappointing that people might think, I'm sure that's not a view that is held alone, and there will probably be other people living in Ludlow who think we're not there and we're not as visible as we should be, and we will do everything we can, not just through this charter, but just through making sure that the local officers understand that they've got to do their best to be as visible as possible. But it is always a challenge for us. But yes, they have a good local team in Ludlow.
So some of the work that we've done,
and perhaps John from Ludlow will be comforted by the fact that they'll be using more social media.
Some of the work, Anthony, we've done in holding to account in the last year, it's been around ensuring that there are, where a post exists in local policing for that safer neighbourhood team, that there is an officer or a PCSO in place. And the last set that was reported to me in the autumn of last year, you had a very low vacancy rate and a very good selection of officers across West Mercia with very few gaps. And indeed, I understand your priority is to keep it that way.
Yes, it is. One of the things I was checking when I went round the stations, both through Christmas and New Year, was whether we are ensuring that the posters that are outside police stations on our boards are up to date with both the pictures of the officers, the whole team, their contact numbers, and my summary would be some were and some weren't, and I have fed that back to the local police commanders. But it's just an example that we can do better to ensure that we haven't got vacancies in those areas, which is great, but we just need to tell people who's there and how they can access the service.
Thanks, Anthony. I want to move on, if we can, move the conversation on to delivering a secure West Mercia. So I always describe this as a non-negotiable part of policing, you know, the being kept safe, doing all of the things that the public don't always see around us being kept safe. In terms of the uplift that we've had in police officer numbers over the last couple of years, we have seen, I think, a significant portion of those allocated to, I think, this part of my police and crime plan. You know, significant uplift in CID officers, in roads policing officers, in officers on shifts, on response shifts across West Mercia. And I think the colloquialism in policing is that some of the shifts are pretty flush now in terms of having officers on duty, and that wasn't the same, I don't think, 2 or 3 years ago, and that's the stark contrast today. I just want to, in this section, talk a little bit around the so what, around what you see as different through this budget round, and indeed the type of things that we can say to the community will make that difference. And the first one I just wanted to go to was around road safety. So the roads are amongst the biggest killers in West Mercia in terms of we are seeing, unfortunately, people dying and indeed being seriously injured fairly regularly on our roads across West Mercia. Whilst it is going down overall, it is still a lot higher than we would want. We also see the roads used in an antisocial sense in terms of villages being blighted or communities being blighted by the way that some people might choose to use their vehicles. I'm interested in just you talking a little bit around how you see that budget develop the journey that I know you've been taking West Mercia on to ensure that we have safer roads and that denying criminals the use of our road network.
Well, the first thing that is really important is it is a stated force priority. Not all forces do have that. It's been really important to me as chief. I lead, as you know, John, nationally for roads policing and road safety, and I know I have your support in ensuring the force has the resources required. And this is where the last couple of years we've had a really good look at how do we ensure that priority can achieve what we are seeking to achieve, which is to stop people being killed on our roads, stop people being injured, and, as you say, remove antisocial behaviour, drivers and users of the road, and people who are breaking the laws. And we've done it two ways. We have put more specialist officers in the last round of the uplift into roads policing, and we have almost completed, that was a programme of action alongside investigators to be completed in this financial year, and we are almost complete in that respect. But actually what the overall uplift allows us to do is to ensure that these hundreds of new officers that have come through that are very new, fresh out of training school largely, there's still many of those hundreds you talked about in their first couple of years. And what I'm committed to ensure is that they have a confidence as to how to tackle road safety issues and antisocial behaviour and travelling criminality, because actually it is a skill that requires that level of confidence and safety as to how they conduct their duties. And some of that comes a little bit with experience. So in 2021, what we want to ensure is that those officers who are now gaining in that experience see policing the roads as something that they should do, as well as the specialists who, of course, are out there every day in a more traffic policing, roads policing specialism.
I think it's fair to say, as Commissioner over my term, roads issues has been the top issue in my post bag from day one, pretty consistently, all of the way through. In terms of the difference communities would feel, I've been out with some of your officers over time, and I've seen the instinct, the professional curiosity around vehicles that might not look right, all the way through to vehicles that are acting in an obvious way that's against the regulations. Is the shift that you're trying to make around it's more whole scale organizational shift rather than it being a short-term project? It's about trying to refocus the organization to ensure that roads is a key part of the way that the area is policed.
Yeah, absolutely, because there are some very specialist functions in how you police your roads. If you're going to stop a large goods vehicle in a dark part of our fort area, and there's all sorts of international and border issues, then of course you probably need a high level of training to be able to do some of that. But at a much more basic level, if you are wired in a way that just sees policing our roads as something you can make a difference on every single day, then when you look at that car, when you look at somebody's behaviour, when the public are complaining about something that may seem to be some low-level nuisance, I would argue that it isn't, and it is something that we should be involved in, because obviously this makes such a negative impact on people's lives. And we can't do that with just a handful of specialist officers, but ensuring that it is a force priority, and that the response officers, the neighbourhood officers, and supported by the officers from the operational patrol unit, then of course we can make a massive impact. And you know, some of the decline in the deaths, and one death, of course, is too many. But we were 2 years ago, sadly, there was somebody being killed on the roads in West Mercia every week. Those numbers have nearly halved now. Now, part of that will be the effect of COVID last year, and of course the volume of traffic and people's whole usage of the road has been dramatically different. Our determination, and the deputy and myself, Julie and I, were just talking about this earlier, saying, well, if we can stop those trends going back up again, you know, we shouldn't accept it, but we can't do that without the support of all of our officers right across West Mercia who make this a priority.
We've had a question in from somebody watching, Dan from Herefordshire, who was asking around Operation Snap. I've heard it said many times that the public are the eyes and the ears. Operation Snap, for those listeners that are watchers that don't know, is a mechanism of support of where the public can submit their dash cam footage or their GoPro footage of motorists who are not behaving in the way that you would perhaps expect them to. And their question is, do you think Operation Snap's been a success in West Mercia? And how do you see in your ongoing focus to the harm caused on our roads as to how the public play their part in it?
Yeah, Snap, Operation Snap, big success. We have bought into this, and I push this hard nationally, actually, because we know that, as you said, the eyes and ears, the public are the ones who can, with our help and perhaps coordination, will make the difference. And you know, if people are seeing things that are dangerous, then go online and upload it, and we can triage it and have a look at the appropriate outcome or sanction in some circumstances. We do have to be careful to manage the expectations of that. Of course, we can't do everything for everybody, but I would still encourage people to upload the dash cam footage, as you've said, and that can also be from head cams from cyclists as well. What is important is we can't really keep our roads safe if we can't change driver behaviour. So our part in this is to just to reinforce it all the time, to constantly get our officers to reinforce, and that will then cause the driver behaviour. And the more the public engage and the more the public can provide some extra eyes and ears, then the better and safer we will be across West Mercia.
I'll just add to that as well. It's probably worth mentioning that although we can't prosecute in all cases because of the level of evidence required, particularly on offences like speeding, we can in many cases, and we always look to use the opportunity to engage with errant motorists, give them advice, warning letters where we can't prosecute, and it really helps us to build up a picture of intelligence for motorists, horse riders as well, cyclists, all users of the road.
John, thanks. Before we move on from there, because obviously we are talking about roads, and I know that a lot of the public will instantly be thinking about when they've been stopped for speeding and things like that. Not that I would have any great knowledge of that, but for those that have. But there's been a comment on Facebook from one of the listeners that more police are needed to fight knife crime and drugs in the UK. And clearly, I don't think the public would link that roads policing actually to the drugs element and the knife crime element. So I just wondered if we could explain a little bit more about how those police are also used in the fight against drugs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point, Tracy. The vast majority of people who commit crime in West Mercia, particularly more serious crime, will use vehicles. They still need to travel around, and many of them are coming from outside our area. They travel in perhaps from the West Midlands across our border. And again, having officers who are looking for, whether it's road offences or serious crime, the correlation and the crossover is very significant. Those people who don't insure their vehicles, don't tax their vehicles, speeding, people who commit what might be seen as minor road traffic offences, parking on double yellows or parking in places that are antisocial, the connection to serious criminality is without doubt. And therefore, if we stop and have a look at that, rather than drive past, we will always be more successful. And some of the successes we've had recently with some very serious criminality in West Mercia was because of a good traffic stop, either before or after, that has then led us to the suspect. So it is absolutely connected. And all I would say is, even if it wasn't, let's not forget where John started with the number of people killed on our roads. We know why people die on our roads, and we should never be apologetic about stopping people who are speeding or drink driving, not wearing seatbelts, using distraction devices. In West Mercia, I will always do my bit to ensure that is a priority, because it will save lives.
Building on Tracy's point, there's commitments within the budget around drugs and serious and organised crime and the harm that it causes in our communities. One of the areas that you've championed investment in last year and again through to this year is around dealing with that and the causes of it. And I just wanted to link together, and it's something I suppose maybe the public don't always get, is there's a focus last year and this year on problem solving, and I think they are linked to serious and organised crime and drugs and problem solving. How I don't know whether yourself or Julian just want to touch on how you see your role in this investment that's been made in the last couple of years in not only dealing with drugs and serious and organised crime, but also the problem solving element that also you are also proposing.
If I can draw an analogy, John, with a contaminated stream going into a pond. Now, bear with me on this. There are three things that as public service, not just as police, but as public service, we should be doing. And what traditionally we've done a lot of is pulling people out of the pond and treating their wounds and their blisters that they've got from the contamination. And of course, that's a really important part of what the public would expect public service and the police to do. But there's much more that can be done to solve the problem. At another level, you can put a fence around the pond and stop people getting into more harm. Or even better still, you can take a wander up the stream and stop the contamination going in at source. And if we apply that to policing and our societies, what we're trying to do is shift focus over time from dealing with all the problems coming in to stopping them from in the first place. And that's a lot to do with what problem-solving teams are about. Yes, there's the fences to put up, but many of the problems we see in society are caused by people that have suffered from what life has thrown at them. And if we can work with partners to get them on a better track and to get people and communities thriving, then everybody is going to benefit in terms of health, well-being, and community safety. So it's recognizing that the answers aren't always about responding. They're also about tackling the causes of the causes. And we've got a part to play in that. So have communities, and so have our partner agencies as well.
I know I touched on the tremendous harm that the roads cause in our community at times, and indeed I do believe some of our communities have become a little blasé or numb to the impact of it. It sometimes is the issue that's skipped over in the newspaper in terms of its impact in that local newspaper. The other thing that the other causer of harm that I am concerned that we as a community need to do more to understand the impact of is domestic abuse. The harm being caused often behind closed doors, out of plain sight. The view of, well, it's only a domestic, isn't that far in our history, and I want to make sure that that we understand and indeed tackling the tremendous misery that domestic abuse can bring to generations. And I know West Mercia have done a significant amount of work over a long period of time around domestic abuse, and this budget builds on that work. I'm just interested in talking just very briefly, because my timing is all out of the window, and I'm never going to do it in 45 minutes. But we'll see whether we can get in under an hour. But issues like domestic abuse are really causing a significant amount of harm, as I said, often in very private circumstances. And just bring to life a little bit of the ambition you set for the progress you want to make by the investment and focus that this budget that's being proposed will bring forward. Anthony, I don't know whether you wanted to pick up or.
Yeah, I'll come in first. Julian may want to add, but it's sort of very similar to what we just talked about on the roads. It is about ensuring that first we identified as a priority, and you're quite right, John. I mean, I've been in policing now nearly 30 years, and we've been talking about domestic abuse, violence, assaults, and sometimes tragically deaths in people's homes. And we know right now that there are still a number of people who live in West Mercia where their home is not safe. That could be a child or it could be an adult. And West Mercia has made it very clear that this is a commitment, but we do not simply sit back and think, there we are, that's job done. This is a challenge. As I said, it's been there for 30 years. And I think this will be a challenge that will be with us for many, many years to come. So what we have to do is to ensure our officers understand what they can do, the signs, how accessible, going right back to that problem solving, being in the communities, because this can be any community, what goes on behind closed doors, and just ensuring that officers are well trained. So we have a training program where they will always be looking for the signs of abuse. And that, of course, must be emphasis on both the victims and survivors, but also the perpetrators. Do we fully understand why people are doing what they're doing, and are we as a police force doing our bit to make people safer? But, Julian, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think the whole country has been looking at charts and graphs, haven't they, recently on the data of COVID. As a police service, we look at the data that sits behind domestic abuse, and we know it's only the tip of an iceberg. We know a lot more goes on underneath, but it does undoubtedly tell us that domestic abuse is a huge problem in terms of volume, in terms of harm to society, in terms of intergenerational trauma as well. And I have to say, I think the police response to domestic abuse today is a lot better than it was before. I'm not saying we always get it right, of course we don't. I think one of our biggest challenges is harnessing all of that new talent that's now coming into the organisation and supporting them to understand domestic abuse. I went out with officers on New Year's Eve, and there's a huge amount of pride in policing coming through, huge potential there, huge enthusiasm. And I think with that great influx that we've got coming through, we owe it to them to pass on the knowledge about what we've heard from victims, what we've learned from victims of domestic abuse over the last decade or so.
I want to move on to the victim strand, but the fact that always sticks in my mind, it's nearly a quarter of crimes recorded in West Mercia have a DA related marker, and that for me is a scary, 1 in 4. That's a scary stat, and for me, right in the focus. And for those that we haven't got time to do it justice in this broadcast, but within the budget there is some very clear granular actions which I very much welcome. I want to move on, if I can, which is a good segue into victims. Obviously, I as Commissioner have the statutory duty around the support given, but West Mercia Police not only deliver some of my statutory duty towards with the coordination of those victim services through the victim advice line, through the investment that we've made in recent years, but also the quality of the victim interaction is often down to how the organisation engages with them and indeed works with them over a long period of time. How, in terms of the budget that we're talking about at the moment, what would you see as the key deliverables from that investment and extra focus that you will be bringing on delivering my, I think, shared ambition with the force to consistently improve victim satisfaction from what is often already at a very good level, but how we continue to make that victim satisfaction better than it is already, and give them the outcome and the justice that I think that they deserve?
My answer really, John, on this is to continue to develop what we talked about last year and probably the year before then, and it has got better. We start from a position where most victims will tell us that they got a very good service from local officers and from officers who investigate their crime. But we also know that they don't always. And therefore, the challenge and our commitment is to continue to build upon the good work and to increase the percentages. So a more significant number of victims will tell us that they had a positive experience. And some of the work that you have supported around the victim advice line is recognising that as good as police officers and our police staff colleagues are in providing that service, sometimes we need to provide some independence, somebody else who's incredibly well trained to provide a different type of service response to the victim, particularly when there's real vulnerability or there's a specialist sort of subject. And that's where the VOW can come in, so that we can signpost in victims and they can then access that service. And one of the things we're working very hard on is to make sure that all of these new officers we've got, and the officers who've been around a little longer, understand and are confident in passing on that information to the victims so that they can access that service. And we've had a look at it before Christmas, and we know we need to do a little better there to ensure that we are giving that information correctly, and then that service can be accessed.
Because contained within the budget, there are some real, I think, aspirations that the force is willing to strive for. around things like the victims code, the compliance with it, being excellent, getting more and more people to be referred into our victim advice line service, an aspiration to upskill the majority of your frontline staff with the right victim focused training. I think these are all really important, lofty aspirations that come from the leadership, and to set that stall that your organisation will be excellent at doing that, I think is the right one and one to be applauded. My only question that I get fed back from sometimes with the community is around consistency. And I know the sometimes tsunami of demand that your organisation faces means that sometimes things won't go as planned, but there is some concern that the consistency of victim services, or the service that victims could expect, isn't the same across the force area. And I'm just interested in your views about how we'll use this budget to bring a bit more consistency, that excellent consistency across the force area.
Yeah, that's a fair observation that we ask ourselves a lot. Why is it that some parts of our force seem to, time and time again, get a different response from victims and apparently a different level of service being provided? We think we're doing the same things. We feel that we are carrying out the same actions, but it seems to be having a different effect. So we are doing a lot of work around that. It's linked to the charter, actually, about how we will ensure that there is a more guaranteed level of service and consistent standards across the force. We also have to accept in West Mercia, we are a very large force geographically, and there are many cultures that exist within our force, and the north of our force to the south of our force. But how do we ensure that if you are a victim in those communities and you are in receipt of the service, that those cultures and that perhaps slightly different approach doesn't stop you getting the same level of service? So it's a constant challenge, but it is one that, as you say, we've committed to resolving in this year to provide an excellent service right across the force.
And I'd just add into that, I absolutely agree with both of you. Our analysis shows that if we were to be more consistent in the service we provided, then that would provide us with a real step up. So we've already invested in a new training package for officers. There's a new video that's available to them. We're determined to build that consistency in our approach, because we've got some great tools, great support to give to victims, like VAL service, for example. And so we're really determined to drive up that consistency for our communities.
It's getting into proper geek territory now. I promise not to get my spreadsheet out, but those interested in the factors that contribute to victim satisfaction, follow-up is a key one that victims say is important to them, and where we see perhaps less than excellent service in victims telling us that they haven't had the service they want, it's feedback, it's follow-up that often is the drag anchor on victims' services. We've put forward, both the West Mercia Police and myself have put forward, we need to invest in technology, and I think that investment in technology that we're making together will help your officers follow through some of their commitments around things like follow-up, and give them some of the modern tools to enable to do that more consistently. Because for me, the goodwill and indeed the instinct of the officers and staff doing that work has to be backed up with the right tools in the organisation to make sure that we can do. For example, victims being able to access automatically the updates on their crime, been around forever in lots of police and organisations. We haven't managed to get that delivered here. It's those types of progress I know this budget will help us carry on to deliver. I want to move on, if I can, to reform, and then we'll have a chance just to put some of the questions that haven't yet featured in our discussions. I always describe reform as the boring part of my job. How we spend your money, and indeed the organisation that goes behind it, is often the dull and boring part, but I think really important. I like to use a statistic that through our collective work of focusing on transformation and reform, we've managed to see an additional 200 officers recruited, plus the ones that we've had part of the national uplift. Now, it's not quite as simple as I just explained it, but it has helped ensure that we have more frontline police resources as a result of focusing on transformation and focusing it on the reason I think the public give us the money in the first place. I'm interested in some of the commitments that you're making, Chief, in the budget proposals, and some of them are around diversity and indeed ensuring that the workforce in West Mercia is roughly reflective of the community that you police. There are some out there that would say this is too right on, and woke, I think, is some of the modern description of it, which I'm not sure I understand, so I probably shouldn't use the word. But why is it something that you've prioritised as Chief, and why is it something that you see as important in the journey that is West Mercia, and why in this budget is it something that you've chosen to highlight?
As a police force, we represent the communities we serve. We are the communities we serve. And therefore, if we're out of proportion, we don't have people who are representing as widely as they can. And of course, you can never be truly representative of everybody who lives within our communities, but we can do so much better. And of course, if we are seeking to encourage more people in, it's very difficult when you are shrinking as an organisation. So for probably most of the time that I've been a chief officer, let alone chief, it has become a really difficult challenge to become more diverse as a police service when your numbers are just getting smaller. Here we are bringing hundreds of people in, and of course we want to make sure they are representative, as far-reaching as we can, right across West Mercia, because that will ensure we can police in a better way, in a more understanding way, and in a way that engages all of our communities right across the vast and very diverse areas that we police. So it isn't for any of those reasons that might be summarised as kind of political reasons or trying to do the right thing. It is well intended, because it is absolutely how you provide a better police service.
And John, you mentioned the word woke, which is quite perhaps a modern term, but the principle that Anthony's just outlaid is at the heart of the Peelian principles. So Robert Peel, his principle number 7 was about the people are the police and the police are the people, and the importance of having a relationship with your community. And that's the way, by reflecting the communities that we serve, that we can best do that. So I think it's always been a foundation of policing.
I've been involved in the national program of uplifting the 20,000 police officers, and I've always been very struck that the community feedback is that, first of all, the respect for the uniform, but also seeing enough of the people in that service that look like yourself. And whilst as a white male, I probably take that very much for granted, but a lot of our communities aren't able to. So for me, it is important, and I think it's important that our communities understand why it's important, if that makes sense. And it is good to hear. The other thing I just wanted to, there's 2 more things I just wanted to touch on. First is around technology. I joined as commissioner an organisation where frontline police officers didn't have smartphones, laptops, body-worn video, etc. We've marched on in time since those were introduced, and there's millions of pounds in being proposed to be invested or continue to be invested in police technology. Some of them are around things like digital forensics, etc. I know the case why, but I'm just interested in Julian or Anthony, just your elevator pitch to the public as to why it is so important, and why this is very much a public-facing investment, and indeed why it's vital, if we don't do this now, what the consequences would be.
Yeah, I absolutely understand what you've reflected back in terms of the community voice about wanting to see police officers visible in our communities, and you've heard what we're looking to do to meet that expectation. But there's no doubt we can't close our eyes to the way that society and crime is changing. And I think the public would expect their police service to be fit for the future. And we know a huge amount of investigation and harm caused to people in West Mercia is now happens online, it happens through devices. And if we don't invest in the right technology to be able to give a really good professional service to those that are victims of cybercrime who need us to interrogate their mobile phone to solve a crime, then we're going to be letting them down. And that's why we are investing a huge amount of public money for very good reason to make this a police service that's fit for the future. And great to see now officers wearing body-worn video. That's in, all the frontline officers have got them. They think it's great, but it makes them more accountable, it captures evidence better, and there are so many opportunities to use technology to provide a better, more efficient police service that we're determined to see home.
One of the interesting anecdotal, and it is anecdotal, I recognise, benefits of things like body-worn video is getting to the truth faster. And I don't mean necessarily absolving the officer always, but actually getting to the fact of the matter earlier, because if there is something that's not right around an officer behaviour, then that is clearer through that technology. But it's also incredibly clearer around the citizens' behaviour. And for me, that record in 2021 that is unequivocal sometimes, or more often than not, I think is a really, really important one. And another great example of how we can use technology to improve the confidence in the public. Tracy, I think you're gesticulating around. Ooh. Tracy is on. She's off.
Thank you, I was. And I think it's probably a good question to sort of end on, because I can see the time, so I won't read it all out. But because we are talking about budget and we are talking about council tax increases, there's a question come in around spend on consultancy. I won't read the whole question, but the person has asked, what benefit does money spent on consultancy bring to the public of West Mercia? And why is this money not being spent on extra police officers, although we have talked about the additional 400 officers, and just asking if you spent that money on police officers, you wouldn't need to put up the precept. So there was just a question around why we need to spend any money on consultants.
So I always think that's a great question for the Deputy Chief Constable.
Perfect for me, in fact. I absolutely understand the premise of the question, and we want to spend as least money as we can, and we certainly don't want to waste money, but we don't want to spend money on expensive consultants where it's not necessary. Where we're investing multi-million pounds in new technology, we need to make sure on behalf of the communities of West Mercia that we have the most cost-effective resources, specialists to give us the best advice, that have got the skills to implement new infrastructure and new systems effectively. But we always put a huge amount of scrutiny into what's best for the public. Do we spend this money on the expertise we've got in-house, and we've got a lot of expertise in-house, or is it better for the public to go out and buy in some expertise? You definitely need some, but I can assure you we always put that detailed scrutiny into what's best for the public when we're spending their money on consultants.
I suppose I would say it, wouldn't I? But I know the chief officers particularly enjoy the scrutiny in and around the budget setting process as we run through, because all of the proposals do go through rigorous processes. It's an early Christmas present, isn't it? Because normally we have to do it in that November to December time in the run up to Christmas, and that structure of testing proposals and indeed ensuring value for money is, I know, at the centre of one of my key priorities. And the reason why it's important to me, and I think one of the stats I really like that backs it up, I inherited a service that only spent just over a third of its revenue budget on frontline police officer pay and overtime. whereas today that figure now is over 50%. So for me, that reform and focus on why we spend money, I think is an important one. And I absolutely, I wouldn't want to speak to any chief officer, but I'm pretty certain that the veracity of spending does get some appropriate oversight, and indeed causes much joy in the run-up to Christmas for any chief officer. I just want to move on from reform to just some more of the general questions that we've had. The first is, I think, a fairly straightforward one. Somebody's asked whether or not are camera vans part of essential workers. I'm assuming they mean the people inside them rather than necessarily the vans themselves.
Yeah, so that might imply that the person asking the question thinks they're not. One of the things that's interesting this time is that our roads are not much quieter than you perhaps would normally expect, and that does worry me. The first lockdown, there was a very dramatic change to traffic on our roads, down by about 80%. It's pretty busy out there. So there's an awful lot of people that have obviously self-defined that they are critical and need to be going about their business. I might have a different view and perhaps suggest they'd be better off staying at home. However, whilst they are out there using the roads, our vans, our safety camera vans, will of course do their job the same as they would on any other day, because they will position their vans where there is likely to be an enforcement requirement. If there are people speeding, then of course people sadly can still get injured and die on our roads through a lockdown as they could in any other time of year. So we will continue with our commitment to keep people safe. So yes, they are critical and essential.
I take the route when I'm able to come to Hindlip along the 449, where they're in North Worcestershire, where I often see the vans out there enforcing because of the history of accidents in the area. And for me, they are an important part of keeping the road safe. And as somebody once told me, they don't catch people that aren't speeding, which I always see as a very important one. We've got no other questions. Thank you very much, Tracy, Anthony and Julian, for joining the discussion tonight, and those watching at home and commenting. Your views are important to me as I set the council tax and set the priorities within the budget. And whilst we ran a large consultation back in November, we are consulting again. If you go to my website, if you put into your search engine West Mercia PCC, you'll see I'm consulting on the budget. That runs through until the 20th of this month. Please do have your say. It's a very short survey, very easy, and takes seconds to fill in, because I want to ensure that your views are at the heart of not only the way that I spend your money, but also in the way that we are kept safe as a community. So thank you all for joining tonight. Please do have a safe evening.